introduce by name a couple panelists we have here with us today. Again, my name is Michael Schutzler. I'm the CEO of the WTIA. Can I just get a round of applause for Jennifer and what she's done for the last 2 years? I have had a long career in this industry, and I've had the privilege to work with some really great people. Jennifer is a true force of nature. She's not only great at coming up with this idea in the first place. We were conceiving this 4 years ago, but literally this was just a back of a napkin. And as you just saw on the map, it's quickly running across the country. And she's been able to do that because she's been a phenomenal recruiter of spectacular talent. Great team of people that we have here. What we have in front of us right now is a panel of employers who have actually got experience with this program. And I had some prepared questions, but as usual, it's just my style. I kind of have to go off the rails a little bit. There's this angle about return on investment, and I think almost all the questions that were prepared ahead of time for this really are talking about the denominator or the numerator of that calculation. And I'd like to just start with that and kind of work our way backwards. Each of your organizations made a decision, and in at least 2 of your cases, I can't remember, Izzy, if this is the case for you as well, but in at least 2 cases, these are the people that actually drove the decision in their organization to, goddamn it, we're going to do apprenticeships, people. And so I'd like to hear your perspective on why are you doing this, and why is it important to your organization? So first your name, your title, and then why did you do this apprenticeship, Shane, and what does return on investment look like to your org? So Tammy, why don't you go first?
Sure. So my name is Tammy Thiemann, and I work for Amazon Web Services, and we started this, primarily I lead the military recruiting team. So my entire focus is around how do we bring veterans into the organization, specifically bring veterans into the organization in tech. And so what we found is while we wanted to hire veterans, the experience they had in the military wasn't necessarily equivalent to what we needed them to be able to do to achieve the hiring bar at AWS. And so as we were trying to solve this problem, apprenticeship really seemed like the way to go, right? And so we started down this journey, and we have been in the thorn in Jennifer's flesh and Jordan's flesh ever since. But it was really a way to figure out how to solve the problem, which is we want veterans in our organization. We have since expanded and figured out this is a model that works. When we talk about return on investment, right, we know that having to go out into the industry pool, you can only fish in the same pond for so long, and then the pond is empty, right? And so we are growing at such an exponential rate that we know that we need to figure out new ways to get talent, and one of the best ways to do that is to grow it. And so we've really been trying to prove, can we grow our own talent, and is the lift too heavy to justify actually doing it? And so I think we've been looking a lot at, what does training cost? What is wages cost? What is the reduced productivity for a team that takes on an apprentice? How long does it take an apprentice to actually get competent and capable in the role that we're trying to fill? And so those are the questions that we've been really trying to answer.
Great. Izzy?
So my name is Izzy Greiko. So my role with the apprenticeship programs is to work with the other hiring managers throughout the organization and basically be a champion for the apprentices coming in. And that involves working with our central program management organizations and also looking at what projects we have suitable for the apprentices, what the placement is like. Part of the reason, or a big reason why we got involved as a company in the apprenticeship programs is just the need to source talent from very diverse sources. Like Tammy was saying, we can only fish for so long in the same pond. The number of positions that we have opened, the type of talent that we want to bring in, the Apprenti program actually opens us up to pathways that we just wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. As Tammy was speaking about the return on investment, some of these questions that that she was mentioning around how long does it take for the apprentice to become productive, what's the tax on the team. These are the very questions that we're also trying to answer. So far, the results from the Apprenti program at Microsoft, as well as a parallel program that we have that's somewhat similar, that we've developed in-house, are actually very positive. Hiring managers are speaking very well of the apprentices coming in, the enthusiasm, the diverse perspectives that they give, and that just enables teams to be more productive.
Mm-hmm.
My name's Kevin Goldsmith. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Avo here in Seattle. And I started Avo about 2 years ago. I was coming from Sweden, actually from Spotify, but I'd been in Seattle before I moved to Sweden. And I'd been building diverse teams for a number of years. When I took on this role at Avo, that was something that was going to be critical for me. And I knew that was something that I wanted to do. And Apprenti for us, as I was coming back into Seattle and looking for ways, how can I drive this within my company? This is critical to me. It was critical to the rest of the senior leadership team as well. And we hadn't been in a very good position. I was actually meeting with Michael, who's pitching us on joining WTIA, right as Apprenti was getting started. And I think it was sort of like, okay, stop digging, you've struck oil. Like, this is exactly the kind of program I was looking for, because for us, this kind of apprenticeship program, we're a much smaller company, obviously, than Amazon or Microsoft. So having something that allows us to dip into a very talented pool that we don't have to build ourselves, and filter through ourselves, was extremely attractive. The way the program was set up, where we had it significantly lowered the risk for us, was super important as well. And these two things about the program made it very attractive to me, but also for the kind of culture I was trying to build at Avo, that was important as well, to bring in not only underrepresented groups, but also my predecessor had built a very senior-heavy team, which from just a diversity, even if they were all white dudes, which they were mostly, that's actually pretty out of balance. So I also wanted to bring in junior talent and make mentoring an important part of our culture. And so the Apprenti allowed us to do all three of these things. We are now, our fourth apprentice started this week. We hired we were part of the first cohort. We hired both of those apprentices. You'll hear from Yana, who is one of our full-time employees now in the next panel. It's been incredibly valuable for us as a company. And I can say it's also just having them in and having them help us build this culture has also been really great for our just normal hiring as well. We hired 15 developers in December, and for a company our size, it's pretty outstanding. And for a startup in this town, a block from Amazon, it's pretty great as well. And a lot of those developers were attracted to the culture that we built and the diversity and inclusion environment that we had. And Apprenti was a very big piece of that for us.
That's great. So before we start spending a little bit of time with the numerator and denominator, I just want to point out some things that might not be super obvious. So Avo, ballpark 500 employees, right? Ballpark-ish, 400?
400.
400 employees. Yeah. Microsoft globally 170, 175, something like that. And locally here in the state of Washington, 45,000 employees. And then Amazon, the most recent number that I saw in the public domain is probably already different, was approaching 500,000 employees. Here in the state of Washington, right around 60 plus thousand, ballpark? Yeah. Right. So intrinsically already what you see is scale, right? We're talking a couple hundred employees, we're talking about tens of thousands of employees, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of employees. And it's interesting that when you look at the apprentice cohorts in all three of them, we're talking 4, we're talking many dozens, and then we're talking already a couple hundred at Amazon. And we're just sort of just beginning to scratch the surface. So one of the core things associated with this analysis of why are we doing this as employers, and what's the math behind this? Part of the whole thesis behind this entire process is it's interesting to hear what the benchmark you just got. The benchmark wasn't hey, it costs me $25,000 to recruit an employee. Let's see if I can find a cheaper way. The benchmark is, hey, I got nothing. do you got something? And then we heard a little bit more of, hey, everybody at work in my company is a white dude. Do you have something other than a white dude? So we're definitely going to hit that numerator side of this discussion. But in order to get there, like in every one of these discussions at every employer, not just among these three, I keep hearing the CFO over and over and over again about this return on investment calculation. So I want you each to now tell us your perspective of the cost to deploy an apprentice. Yes, you have to pay, it looks like, was the average wage 51K? 51K, including benefits or not? Not fully loaded, so ballpark fully loaded and 65, 75, I have 80. So $75,000 fully loaded expense that the employer's bearing, we know that's the cost, but what are other costs? And there's all kinds of crap you got to go through because this is brand new and there's change management and you got to find mentors. What does that look like? So I'm going to reverse this around. I'll have Kevin go first and then we'll go to Tammy.
So the cost actually was a bit of an appeal for me. At the time I think we signed up, I had one headcount left for that calendar year. And so I could hire 2 apprentices and that was basically half a salary each. So I essentially cheated and got us 2 junior
So you had no
developers.
headcount, you faked it.
I faked it. It's budget, it's a budget trick. So, but for me, as I said, the cost. So that was a way of getting 2 in the door. I knew we wanted to have more than 1 at a time because I wanted them to actually be able to be supported for each other. The cost for us beyond the financial wasn't significant, honestly. There was the time of training and the extended mentoring time. But with the year-long program, I felt pretty confident that we'd get a lot of return on that investment, and that really was true. I think it was maybe for each of them both very, very bright, maybe a couple months of kind of hands-on, just paired programming. We didn't do, I know both Microsoft and Amazon have done like training classes. We didn't do that. We put them in teams and we had them work with teams and we just did a lot of hands-on paired training.
So your training overhead was soft, in other words.
Training overhead was soft, but after a couple months or maybe even less, I think they were both able to work independently, right, with a little bit of help and then less help and then less help. And certainly by the end of, within a few months, they were both just normal developers on the team.
And is the implication then that you're using a trial by fire methodology and therefore the critical skill beyond the math and logical critical thinking and emotional intelligence is that they're just going to be able to hit the ground running and deal with ambiguity?
No, trial by fire infers a sink or swim, which we definitely don't do.
Okay.
So no, there's a tremendous amount of support for, we also bring in from other programs. Apprenti is one of 2 programs we work with. And for both programs, now it's assumed that we're going to be spending a lot of time at the beginning supporting and nurturing. And there's always help available to everybody. That's actually the culture we wanted to make, was that everybody, not just folks who are coming from apprenticeships or internships, we would trust each other. That was the kind of collaborative culture, mentoring culture we were trying to build. And so, yes, but at the same time, yeah, we want to, the benefit we can give to our apprentices is they can actually learn what it's like to work in the industry. And my goal for them was, whether we hired them or not, I wanted them to be capable of going to another company. If we decided not to hire and they got jobs at Microsoft as junior developers, that would be, to me, a huge win for us, a huge win for them as well. So that was our goal, was at the end of that year, I wanted both our apprentices to be able to be a credible developer at any company in this town. And I'd say within each of them, within 7 months, we'd achieved that. We converted them both early because they were absolutely credible developers at that point that we would have hired if they came in off the street.
So Izzy, at Microsoft, much larger number of people, a couple of different groups, a bit more infrastructure and overhead required to do that. So what did change management look like in your organization? What costs did you have to incur other than the salary and the benefits?
Sure. So the real cost is really upfront. We do put the apprentices through. This is in addition to the 5-month coding academy training period. We put them through a 4-week boot camp once they get done with the coding academy, and that's a boot camp that's a little bit more specific to Microsoft, perhaps even specific to teams that the apprentices would be placed on. So obviously that's an upfront cost. Now, in addition, of course, one of the big things that we require of teams that will be hosting apprentices is to provide them mentoring, to provide them an appropriate project, and to provide them the ongoing feedback. Now, fortunately, for a lot of those mechanisms, the feedback mechanisms, the mentoring, that's not something that's terribly new to Microsoft. So I think we've been fortunate in that it's not necessarily ingrained in the culture of every team, but when I speak to hiring managers and set those expectations around what's required, they more or less know. They may have a few questions, but they know what they're signing up for. Exactly how that impacts the productivity of the team. I don't have very hard numbers on that, and that's somewhat hard to quantify, I will say. But what I will say is for the parallel program that we run, the LEAP program that we've developed in-house, that's somewhat similar. The conversion rate for the folks that go through a LEAP program, and it's a much shorter program, so it's not really a direct comparison, but it's been around 65% or so that we actually hire them back. And the ones that are not retained, again, it's an opportunity for those candidates that they've enhanced their skill set, they've gotten some practical experience, and we're really benefiting here the whole ecosystem. And that's just as important as developing a workforce for Microsoft.
Yeah. So it sounds like there wasn't an incremental cost required to deploy apprentices. You took advantage of some existing systems and processes that you were already using for onboarding and general workforce development programs, and you essentially leveraged that internally.
I think that is mostly accurate. Probably the only part that I will add here is just the ongoing incremental cost of mentoring and the ongoing cost once these folks become full-time employees, right? They bring in a variety of experiences from the non-tech sector, and their tech skills, they will require constant development, constant learning. So teams that actually hire them after the apprenticeship period is over, that has required some adjustment in terms of telling folks, well, how do we interview these candidates? How do we think of them? Your typical college candidate, your typical junior developer, you'll go through an interview loop and you may ask them some deep algorithmic questions and they'll code on the whiteboard and that'll tell you a few things, or maybe not. So how do we actually tailor that process to candidates that may not have that background, but they may be bringing in so many other things that are also just as relevant to be a successful software engineer?
Yeah. So Tammy, your magic mission at Amazon on this particular program is bringing a very large number. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say is it 25,000, 30,000 veterans into the system? Right, so this is a component of that. So give us a perspective, what are the costs to do something brand new inside an organization that's already got machinery flying all over the place, literally, and people are sort of like in a constant state of chaos there because every day another 5,000 people show up. So what the heck? What's an extra couple hundred, right? So what's that cost look like? If only it was that easy.
What the heck? It's just a couple hundred. Clearly, I don't have the art of persuasion the way that you do. No, what I'd say is I would not underemphasize, at least from my perspective, the setup in terms of systems and making sure that we've identified what does an offer letter look like for an apprentice that is different than a standard full-time hire. How do we pay these people, and how do we keep it equitable when we're bringing people and we're putting them on a team, but we're wanting to keep it equitable. So there is somebody alluded earlier, just, you cannot underestimate the operational and logistics of setting up an apprenticeship internally in a company. But once you scale that wall, then when we really start talking about, what are the costs? We've tried to look very closely at what is the cost. Really, the first cost for a team is the way that we have designed apprenticeship is that we require the team that brings on an apprentice to take it out of their head count. So let's say you have a team that has 20 people on their team, and they can decide whether or not they're going to bring on a fully productive full-time employee or they can bring on an apprentice. They have to use one of those 20 to bring on an apprentice. We feel like there's some real benefit in that model, because what that means is when the apprentice finishes, there is a job waiting for them because they're already filling the seat, right? And so we've done that purposefully because we want there to be a role for that person when they get done. But at the end of the day, you're asking the team to take a pretty significant hit because we are going to take somebody who is in the learning phase. You mentioned mentorship, Izzy, and we've evaluated, we check in with our apprentices every 2 weeks. I have a program manager on my team who tracks a bunch of different metrics over the course of their apprenticeship. And what we've determined is some roles require more, some roles require less, but on average for the apprentices that come to Amazon, it requires about 2 hours per week from the mentor. So that means that it's 2 hours that we're giving to the apprentice. It also means 2 hours that that person is not productive on their team. Now, we believe that there's, benefits on the other side of that, right? And then we've also looked at just production metrics, and really where it comes back to, and it comes back to that head count, is when we talk about metrics in terms of ramping. How long of a time does it take them from the time that they arrive on Amazon campus? And our model is we do instructor-led training up front, followed by 12 months of on-the-job training. So they arrive day one for on-the-job training. How long from the time that they arrive day one till it takes them to get productive? Now, we've tried several different models, but our current model is that we will pay apprentices from the time that they enroll in instructor-led training. So however long instructor-led training is until the time that they're fully productive is what we term as kind of ramp, right? And so, so again, it goes back to that productivity measure of measuring that against what a full-time employee would cost us. And I think those are some of the, I think there's a lot of other costs, but I think that's really kind of how we're looking at it.
So just to clarify, your current plan is paying salaries to apprentices even though they're off doing stuff at Code Academy land for 4 months?
True statement.
Okay, which is different than some of the other models that we've talked about, where someone
It
else
is-
paid for training and then they showed up.
It is different, and what I would tell you is, so this goes back to, so we did our very, very first cohort where we did not pay people while they were going through training, right? And we had one particular just individual, right, who really was in a situation in which it just wasn't a great situation, couldn't really afford to keep up with it, and it affected learning, right? And so the idea is we have very clear metrics that we've identified, that we want a certain number of people that we put into instructor-led training to come to on-the-job training, and we want a certain number of those to actually be hired by us. And we're super aggressive in those numbers. And so if we're putting somebody in training that we're paying for, however all of that comes together, we want them to be singularly focused on being successful and being prepared for job, right? And if they're fighting the battle of how am I going to pay my bills and, just all the other stuff, life, right? We all have life. And so our goal is by paying them a salary, we just came to the conclusion that we could solve that problem.
Yep. So none of you mentioned this, and I'm curious if it's just because it's just so easy because of the position you had in the company, because you have that much power and control, right? None of you said that you had to sell this internally. None of you said that there was organizational friction associated with the deployment. None of you said anything about, like, hey, this is not how we do things. So who did you have to pitch? And what was it like once you started getting those first few bodies in there? And what was that organizational friction like? Describe that a little bit. Izzy, you go first. I see you smiling, so there must be something there.
So for me personally, the big thing at Microsoft that we enjoy with these apprenticeship programs is the executive leadership support, and kind of in particular when we've engaged with Apprenti, we did have support of our vice presidents across the company. You know, specifically the broader division I work in, Windows and Devices group. That support is top down, and it is expected that we invest in a diverse workforce from a variety of sources. One of those being obviously Apprenti, and that has made things easier. There is still the challenge of talking to line level hiring managers, because let's face it, there is a fair amount of delta between a VP and line level engineering managers. And actually talking to them about the program, talking to them about what's expected, you know, why they would invest, and getting them to actually commit to that. But that's something that, as we've done more and more, both with Apprenti and our Parallel Leap program, it's become easier and easier. And it's to the point even now where at the conclusion, you know, with Apprenti, it's still too early to tell because we're 5 months into our first cohort and just about 2 months or so into our second. But with the Parallel Leap program, that's a much shorter program. We actually have hiring managers that didn't even host the apprentices. We have a project fair at the end for apprentices to showcase what they've done. And other hiring managers that maybe weren't even involved in the program, that's where they come in to learn more. That's where they come in to collect resumes, talk to the candidates. And it's almost somebody mentioned, I think, earlier about headhunting apprentices. Somewhat internally, folks are being headhunted, and we've had cases where apprentices received offers from multiple teams.
Awesome. Tammy, any friction internally, selling this, pitching this, getting this like from point A to point B?
Friction is my daily life. No,
Amazon is well known as a frictionless organization.
No, I think, so I think we approached it, you know, and I think that there's multiple ways to approach an organization as large as Amazon, right? You can start at the top and work your way down. You could start at the bottom and work your way up. You could poke yourself in the middle and try to go both directions, right? We really started from the operational level. To the point of we wanted teams who were engaged and bought in, and again, thinking about it uniquely from our perspective, in that we were looking at veterans. The place where we started was, who are those veterans in the organization that we know understand the skill set that a veteran brings to Amazon, and so that's where we started. But as we have grown, right, and getting systems in place and scaling, the Apprenti team. We could talk all day about scale and the challenges of scale, right? Because 50 is different than 200, and 200 will be different than 1,000. And so it requires continual selling and operational support. And so as we scale, you know, it requires more buy-in and more buy-in. And so I would say every day is a friction day of working through those details. But here's the great thing, right? The outcomes that we're able to share. I mean, just to share a little bit, when we look across folks just not being veterans, and I know Jennifer shared, you know, we've skewed some of the data because we've really gone after veterans. But when you look at the cohorts that are currently in play right now at Amazon, excluding the fact that they're veterans, 63% of them are either female or underrepresented minorities, right? So when we talk about diverse perspectives, like, we're showing real results. And so those kinds of numbers or success rates, right? So of the first 63 that came through our program, 92% of them moved from instructor-led training to on-the-job training. And when we're talking about accelerated rates in which we're taking coursework and compressing it, and I'm sure you'll hear from some of our apprentices, it's the hardest studying that they will ever do in their lifetime, right? But at the end of the day, those kinds of results are showing the level of competency and the diverse perspectives that we're bringing to the organization. And so that reduces friction, but There is friction.
For sure. Kevin,
Thoughts on this one?
It's nice to be a C-level.
Yeah.
Just, this is what we're doing. I'm signing the contract. So
That's
I
that
could just-
executive support
yeah,
Izzy was looking
just,
for.
Yeah, that's executive
You come
support.
work with us.
Yeah. All right, this is what I want to do. This is what we're going to do. So that said, it wasn't. I didn't have. Luckily, Avo's senior leadership team is awesome. I had no friction from within the senior leadership team. I did have friction from within my organization because, as I said, we were a company that had traditionally hired senior people, most with 4-year CS degrees. And there was a lot of concern. Are we going to be lowering our bar? Are we changing who we are? And so that was friction I had to overcome. I will say that certainly the quality of the people that we brought in through Apprenti helped change that significantly. And I would say half my organization was very supportive. The other half range, but just having the folks in, seeing the quality of the people, working with them day to day, I think that's all gone. In fact, I think we were just acquired. We have a new corporate parent, and I think the questions. Their senior leadership team was at Avo a couple weeks ago and doing a town hall, and the questions were, are we going to continue to support Apprenti? Are we going to continue to support Ada? Because that was very critical, and that was all coming out of my organization. People feel very proud that this is who we are as a company. So yeah, that was overcome over time.
That's great to hear.
Like any good corporate parent, blindsided by the question, the answer was we'll have to look at that. We'd like to get more information.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more denominator question, just a little nuance here. And you actually teed this up nicely, unexpectedly. So when we first started talking about this idea 3-4 years ago, quite a number of employers kind of laughed at us and said, no, this is just a dumb idea. This is never going to work. Not just because it's hard, you've heard some of the aggravation here, but because we already have a circumstance now where if you graduate with a computer science degree from the University of Bothell, you suck. And if you graduate from the University of Washington Computer Science and Engineering School with a degree in computer science, we can't get enough of you, which is catastrophic craziness because the programs literally are mirror images of each other. When the idea was brought up of a completely different non-pedigreed thing, even if you had executive C-level sponsorship, even if you figured out how to navigate your whole organization, you're still putting people into the midst of coworkers who took great pride at the lunchroom saying, yeah, I got a 4.0 at UW-CSC, or that's chump. I'm a Stanford graduate. And here comes somebody who's an apprentice saying, I worked at Nordstrom's for the last 10 years. So is there any cost and is there any issue associated with the actual honest-to-God integration of these non-standard techie human beings in the midst of, very prideful people? What's that look like organizationally? What's the cost there? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in on that one.
Yeah.
So I would just definitely say, so we hear that all the time, right? The whole pedigree thing. But what's been super interesting, and I had this, and you kind of spurred it, just a memory, but I'm starting to hear this more and more. So we bring these folks in, right? And so a lot of times our apprentices come in at the same entry point in which a college hire would come in, right? So they come in from this wonderful university, and then we're bringing somebody who's been in the military for 15 years, and they're going to come land on the same team, but they maybe don't have the theoretical piece. But all the supervisors and the mentors are like, this person's here at like 7:30 in the morning. Who in Seattle gets up at 7:30 in the morning, right? And so what we're finding is our supervisors love the way that this group of people round out a team. And I got an email. We just got done with a blitz. in Hawaii for one of our apprenticeships where we're going to do the training there. And the hiring manager came back to me and basically said, I'm never hiring another college hire again, which I am sure is completely false and completely untrue. But at the end of the day, really was excited about all of those other non-technical skills that an apprentice brings. And again, when we were talking about veterans, we even take that up a notch potentially of the discipline, the organization, the follow through, the I will take the hill at all costs, I will not fail mentality, which really adds to the team in terms of dynamics, and supervisors and mentors love it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I had to laugh when you were talking about that. When I worked in the Windows for Devices group, like 14 years ago, we had the MIT Mafia, the CMU Mafia, the Princeton Mafia. UW wasn't even in the picture.
Not even in there.
And we would have battles between us, like whichever the ranking was, whoever was on top, you'd get that pride moment. But I absolutely have to echo what you said, which is one of the things I think all of us have really appreciated about the folks that we brought in who had careers before they went to these programs. Man, like they are incredibly efficient, professional people, and the college hires I bring in this is their first job, and they don't know how to do a job, and we have to train them how to be an employee. And that takes longer, honestly, than it takes for some of the apprentices, because they're super happy to be there and they love it, and this is new for them, and this is what they've been working towards, and they are such dedicated and professional people. It's a joy having them in the groups.
Yeah. Izzy, anything to add?
Yeah, certainly, I can definitely relate to that. MIT Mafia, although not personally. I don't have a pedigree degree myself, so certainly a lot has changed though over the last 14, 15 years at Microsoft. One of the things that I didn't mention before, I think, is the way that we place the apprentices on the team is actually a little bit different from what Tammy mentioned. We don't actually require teams to commit firm headcount. Instead, that headcount is managed centrally at the VP level, and we've got a certain number of apprentices that we place within the organizations. And then we do ask teams, based on future anticipation, based on future growth, even based on attrition. People come and go in this industry all the time. Now, if you anticipate growth, if you think that if the apprentice does well, if you will be able to offer them an FTE position, well, you're probably a better candidate for an apprentice than a team which doesn't have those opportunities looming ahead. And that's kind of one of the ways that I think has been helpful to perhaps overcome hey, I'm not hiring this person with a pedigree or even a computer science degree. And it has become, at least at evaluation time, more of a skills-based. We have these apprentices coming in early, being enthusiastic. I'm hearing they're much more enthusiastic in a lot of cases than our regular employees.
Yeah. So I hope I've made the case that the denominator in your return on investment calculation is actually not correct. Like, if you think like a CFO, it's not about the money. The net cost of deploying an apprentice is actually not $75,000, or if you add the RSI on top of it, $90,000. It isn't that at all. There's actually a negative aggravation component to this. It's actually beneficial to bring people in that are in their late 20s and 30s. There's actually some value in bringing somebody completely different onto the team. That's not calculated on a dollar basis. And I think that's a good tee up to what I want to do now is I want to just let each of them just sort of go rampant on the most exciting component of this. So the cost is what it is in terms of hard dollars. The actual organizational cost arguably is actually even negative. So this is a really interesting thing. But the benefits, and each of you have alluded it to some degree, isn't also just calculated the way a CFO would in what's my productivity metric? Like, how many lines of code did we write today? Jim, or Jane, hopefully these days. Or, did we ship the product on time? It isn't just a productivity metric. What are the benefits to the organization? What is the return? In the same way that return on aggravation is probably the correct way of describing this, not return on investment. What is that return? What does productivity look like? It's not just dollars. What is the benefit of having a veteran there? What is the benefit of having a black woman coder next to a whole bunch of white guy coders? Like, what do we get as an organization? What is the industry really getting as a benefit of having an apprenticeship? And then I'm going to open it up the floor.
I can jump in. I think from a benefit standpoint, it goes back to having teams that have a diverse perspective, for sure. When you start talking about apprentices, you're talking about somebody who was trying to figure out how to get their foot in the door somewhere. And now all of a sudden, a company has invested in their future in a super meaningful way. You want to talk about retention numbers and attrition numbers? Fantastic, right? You have somebody who already comes into the organization with a learning mentality, right? Because we know at the pace of Amazon, at the pace of Microsoft, at the pace of Avo, you're not going to go learn it and then do it for the next 20 years. You're going to have to keep learning, right? And so we're already bringing somebody in who has that expectation of, I'm going to learn, and they just don't stop learning. And the other thing that I think organizationally is, and I continue to hear great things about Avo and the way that Kevin has done this, which is how do you create a culture of mentorship in your organization, right? Because whether it's an apprentice or a pedigreed college student or somebody who's been in the industry 10 years, it's creating that teamwork and a team that's willing to mentor each other. And I think that that's super valuable as well.
So I've spoken about the just enthusiasm and the degree of just collaboration that apprentices have brought onto many teams at Microsoft. And I continue to hear that over and over. Tammy, you mentioned the desire to learn, and I think that's type of behavior that's contagious. Now, if we see an apprentice bringing in that desire, it up-levels in some ways the rest of the team members. It reinforces the fact that we're committed to having a diverse workforce. We're making products not just for white dudes, but we're making products for everybody, for a very diverse population around the world, and just having those perspectives, building a workforce that can provide those perspectives is something that, as was said, is not something that I can easily put a dollar value on, or at least directly put a dollar value on.
So in the industry, we used to hire rock star developers, right? Or ninjas or that kind of thing. And those days are gone. I mean, we no longer talk about hiring really strong individuals. We talk about building strong teams. And for me, that for a long time, that's meant a diversity. And it's a diversity in age, in background, in races, in education, time in the industry, all those things. We are building product for people, and people don't look like tech today. And what I can say is I can probably put a dollar value on it, in that, this has been a 2-year mission at Avo, and in the, so there was setup time and getting things going, and in the last year, really, we have seen an acceleration in delivery, an acceleration in morale from our over the last two surveys we did is up 20 points NPS from within the teams. And this is as all the things we've been putting in place have accelerated. So not only are the folks in the development teams happier, but they're getting more done and they're delivering faster. Retention has been pretty outstanding. In this town, retention is now like approaching a year, I think, or like 14 months for a developer. So anything we can do to keep people happy and keeping work done is just amazing benefits for us. And we've seen a lot of that from doing this work.
So now you have a return on investment calculation, or as I prefer to refer to it, as a return on aggravation calculation. So anybody have a question for these awesome panelists who just gave you the truth about apprenticeships inside a tech company? Nope. Yep. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. I think the champions that sort of blaze these trails are, few, and appreciate the demonstration, especially when talking with auto industry and other tech employers in Detroit. It's been helpful to say, yes, there's real experiments going. So I know that there are sort of HR challenges in one accepting the credential as a portable thing nationally. So I think one of the goals that I would have personally from Detroit is that of the 1 million+ people that left Michigan over 20 years, many of them moved to, say, Austin, Texas. And when that person that goes through an apprenticeship program with Amazon wants to move back to Detroit, the General Motors will recognize the credential that you helped them get in Austin. So can you talk about how we're effectively shifting the supply curve of talent by opening up more credentialing opportunities?
I mean, I think, the entire model, right, is, we leverage, industry recognized certifications as part of our instructor-led training. So for us, and I think the model that was shared earlier this morning is instructor-led training followed by on-the-job training. So generally, the way that we do it is we've got those industry recognized certifications like CompTIA, and then we've got AWS certifications that play in. So by the time that somebody leaves, and let me be very, very clear, I know as Jennifer is trying to increase the entire ecosystem, I am trying to find employees for Amazon. And so at the end of the day, my goal is not to train somebody to send them out the door, but certainly because the entire program is based around certifications, I think that's the point of apprenticeship.
Right?
Mhm.
So people move
Yep.
from place to place regardless of our best.
And they will absolutely have that on their resume to take with them. And, it's really interesting. We talked about folks who, are already being recruited. We have somebody who was coming through an Amazon apprenticeship program, was recruited by another company. And my conversation with the hiring manager, I was like, the aggravation, to use your term, right? But his comment back to me is he goes, he's going to be a great Amazonian someday. So let him go. Let him get that additional experience, and I'm going to hire him back someday. Let's make a note to get him back here, right? And so I think there is, right, it's that how does it work as you move around your career individually and then throughout the entire community.
And there's certain areas in software, the accreditation isn't really that meaningful. A year of professional working is probably at a company that you've heard of is probably better than any particular certificate. Just from my hiring of developers, I'd rather see strong open source contributions or a year at a company I know is like a decent company, and I don't care that much about the accreditation. But that's software development. Other industries.
90% of the job postings still, at least in the Detroit market, still require a bachelor's degree to get in the door.
A lot of them in computers do too, but to me, that's just ignorance.
Yeah.
You're actually making a super compelling point for our friends at the Department of Labor as to why it is that a registered national apprenticeship is so valuable because of the portability. We're not there yet, right? But the idea is to have this thing up here be that pedigree marker that says, oh, you completed an apprenticeship program in the tech industry? Bam. Right? We're just not there yet. And you can't have that if it's strictly an industry-driven apprenticeship, because Amazon will do what Amazon needs for Amazon. And Microsoft will do what Microsoft will do for Microsoft. And Avo probably won't do it because they won't stand it up on his own. I mean, he's the C-level, he's the CTO, right? But he was so excited and pumped up about the fact that we brought a program, right? So if you really want to build an ecosystem that works for the entire industry, and not just the top 10 employers, then you have to have a nationally registered apprenticeship program. Otherwise, it won't work. You were going to add something, Izzy?
I was just going to second here what Kevin said about the skills and the ever-changing set of skills that's required. Personally, I never really favored a certification in any particular language. That's a stepping stone. I would much rather see the certification combined with some relevant work experience, combined with a history of learning, a history of upgrading the skills. Even somebody that got a computer science degree 15, 20 years ago, the world is so different now. That if they didn't upgrade their skills through either on-the-job training or some other set of experiences, it wouldn't be so good.
In Detroit, you have the Detroit Labs folks who are doing amazing work. I would hire somebody out of Detroit Labs with 2 or 3 years there, and they're just training people in their community, right, with no degrees or But I know those folks, and I know the quality of their work. So I'd look at that over an accreditation.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, I'm turning the microphone back over. Please give our panelists a round of applause.